Okay, welcome. This is the Athletic Director Breakout Session. I'm Glenn Sugiyama, Managing Partner at DHR International, and we have a distinguished panel with us today of presidents of universities across the country, and they're going to introduce themselves right now.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm Nayef Samhat, president at Wofford College down in Spartanburg, South Carolina. I think I've been there 6 years. I think I'm no doubt leading the smallest of the institutions on this panel here. We're about 1,700 students.
My name is Ron Machtley, and I'm president of Bryant University in Smithfield, Rhode Island. I've been the president for 23 years, so I've seen a few ADs and a few coaches and a lot of basketball games.
I'm Eric Kaler. I'm the president of the University of Minnesota, so welcome you all to the Twin Cities. I think we're showing pretty well. It'll be 60 degrees and sunny today, just like it always is in Minnesota. So welcome. The University of Minnesota has 5 campuses, about 60,000 students, roughly 750 student athletes, 20, how many sports now? 25 Division I sports, and happy to be here with you this morning.
Thanks very much. And you know, this is your session. This is for you, so I want to make sure that we tailor everything to you. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hand at any time. We want to make sure that we cover everything that you want to cover. The two major points that we're going to look for today are, one is how do the presidents expect athletic directors to interact with them? You know, how is it different from other members of their cabinet? How is it different from other deans or VPs on their staff? And, you know, how do they like to interact with their athletic director on a daily basis? And then the second thing is, when they're looking for an athletic director, if they have an opening, what are things that they'd be looking for in their athletic director that they hire? Okay, so Nayef, why don't we start off with you? You're right here. So what is the optimal president-athletic director relationship from your point of view?
I think it's one anchored, of course, in trust. I would say that about my relationship with all my senior staff. Our athletic director sits on the senior staff, the cabinet, and you have to have a shared understanding of the mission of the institution, the purposes of why we're there, the nature of the institution, and understand what the expectations are. And that's born of a strong bond of trust. And so we meet on a regular basis. We meet once a week outside of our weekly senior staff meeting. And we're talking on a fairly routine basis about issues that come up. But on the other hand, you need to trust the AD to take care of those problems and those questions and issues that are kind of routine in the day-to-day operation.
Ron?
Well, I think, as I have said, having trust in your AD and having him having trust in you is the most critical element of the relationship. Because if there's an issue that pops, you want him to have trust that he can pick up the phone and tell you exactly what's happening and not sugarcoat it, or worse, not tell you about it. I've had 2 ADs who I've had that relationship with. They've been terrific. I just met one of them, Dan Gavitt, who is now heading up the entire basketball program. And he's what I think of as sort of the epitome of an athletic director who's smart, who understands people. He's a player's AD, he's a coach AD, and better than that, he's a president's AD, because he can communicate with all of those elements, and you have to be able to communicate. And so I think that developing a personal relationship in today's complicated governance world, having an AD who not only with those 3 but can communicate with the provost and the academic departments is also extremely important.
So really, to build on Ron's comments, communication is absolutely key. I don't know how people talk to their ADs before text messaging, but Mark Coyle is my AD now, and I are all the time texting back and forth. He keeps me tightly in the loop when things happen. And things do happen, and everybody knows in D1 athletics that if you say something on social media, you might as well just put it on the front page of the New York Times and send it around the world. Or on CBS. It's a very connected world, and everybody knows everything right away. And you don't want, as a president, to get surprised. So that constant communication is really important. The bedrock of all relationships with senior leaders, of course, as my friends have alluded to, is trust. If you don't have absolute trust that your AD is looking out, A, for the institution, B, for you, and C, for the health and well-being of the student athletes, then you don't have the right AD.
Let's start with you, Dr. Machtley, on this one. How much more in tune are you with compliance and regulatory functions of college athletics, specifically as it pertains to men's basketball, as opposed to, let's say, 2 years ago?
Well, when I came on the Board of Governors, I became even more aware of what's going on a sort of national basis, and it really piqued my attention to make sure I know what's going on in my institution. Because the last thing you want to do is make a mistake and embarrass not only yourself, your institution, but the NCAA. It's a very, as we all know, it's a very complicated world out there. And I worked with Eric as we began to think about how do we have everyone, not just athletic directors, everyone in the organization trying to sign some sort of attestation that they're thinking about what are the requirements of coaches, assistant coaches, and it's always different between a coach, assistant coach, and the guy or woman who's working at a low level, making sure that we're all trying to do our very best to keep up with what is, frankly, very complicated.
Well, as a member of the Board of Governors and as chair of the Division I board, I am now, I would say, intensely aware of the regulatory and compliance issues around really all of our sports, but men's basketball most significantly after the actions in the Southern District of New York and the subsequent criminal proceedings. It's not a pretty world. Recruiting basketball in the world today is highly competitive, and unfortunately, adults can take shortcuts. And monitoring, controlling, preventing those kind of shortcuts is really hard to do. The students, at the end of the day, the student athletes, ultimately are the victims of those shortcuts. They're the ones who are going to suffer by being ineligible or not being able to play at the school that they want to go to. So I feel a strong personal responsibility for the NCAA's monitoring and creation of controls that can do all we can to prevent that kind of behavior.
Well, I'd say that since joining the D1 board and Board of Governors, my understanding has intensified dramatically, and of course always had a deep appreciation of it. Compliance, from my perspective, is a bedrock of integrity for collegiate athletics, and so having that understanding, again, with our AD and everyone in our athletic program is absolutely essential. Because if that breaks down, as Eric noted, student athletes suffer, the integrity of the collegiate model suffers.
Well, as everyone knows, we're here for the Final Four, so one of the things that I wanted to talk about in specifically to men's basketball is the transfer portal and its effect on basketball and other sports. What do you think as far as, what is your opinion?
I think I think there are benefits to it. We're, as a small college, we're probably not as affected by the transfer practices, both in and out of the institution, as larger institutions. But I think it surely gives student athletes opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have, in creating some sense of balance in the whole transfer experience.
A wise man once said, if you show me a very complicated problem with a simple solution, I'll show you a simple solution that's plausible but wrong. And that's probably where the transfer falls. It's a very complicated problem as you begin to think about it. There are different issues if you're a small school trying to prevent your athletes from transferring up. If you're a big school trying to prevent your stars from transferring across. If you're a graduate student who wants to go to a different school to get a different degree, it's a complicated problem. And I think we have to just keep the eye on the ball of how do we make sure that we're doing the best for students, their educational experience, for encouraging the athlete who may not be capable of playing at Division I to be able to go to another school and play competitively. But I do think, for me, there is one thing that I've been suggesting. We could solve the graduate school problem because very few graduate school students are completing their degree by just saying that that transfer, that one scholarship is going to stay with the length of the degree program. So if he or she leaves at the end of the first semester after playing basketball, you don't get an extra scholarship. Whether that ever passes, I doubt it. But it's an issue, and we all have to be thinking about what's in the best interest, but there's no simple solution.
So again, transparency is a wonderful word in our society today, and the transfer portal does, I believe, increase transparency and lets people know more clearly what's going on. That's a good thing. But as Ron said, there is, I think, fair to say nothing that we've tackled in NCAA governance in the past 4 years that's been more complicated and more friction-loaded than the transfer issue. It really has so many dimensions. You know, you might say at first blush, well, sure, if you're not going to play at A, you should transfer to B. Well, there's roster management issues, there's competitiveness issues, there's fairness issues to other students who would get bumped if you were to do that, and it would just create a free-for-all that I think is not in the best interest of the student athletes who, remember, at the end of the day, are here to complete a degree. And it's objectively true that if you transfer schools 1 or 2 times, it takes you longer to achieve that degree, which at the end of the day is going to be the outcome that 99% of our student athletes are going to benefit from in their lives from playing college athletics.
Yeah, you know, I'm a former college basketball coach, and one of the things is we used to look at kids who transfer high schools or transfer AAU teams as being very negative. Now it's a norm. Kids play on a different high school almost every year of high school. They play on a different AAU team, sometimes 2 and 3 teams in a summer because they're not happy with their playing time, etc. And now it's continuing into college. So, you know, with that, I think we're going to take a break for the audience and see if there's any questions. We've covered 3 things here. Interaction with your president, you know, the transfer portal and compliance. So about these 3 subjects, any questions at this point from the panel?
Not about those things.
Anybody? Yes.
Troy Dannon, Athletic Director, Tulane. And this may fall into the latter 2 questions. And remove yourself from the national governance responsibilities. But from an institutional standpoint, where are your institutions on name, image, and likeness as this continues to evolve? I think this is our next 4 years.
Yeah, I'll take the first bounce on that if you don't mind, Glenn. I think, and I hate to say it, but it is complicated. As you know, the Alston case was decided in favor of the plaintiffs and the idea that they could be awarded benefits for name, image, and likeness. The NCAA and all of the party conferences to that lawsuit have filed an appeal. That will go on in the 9th District, and ultimately I wouldn't be surprised if the Supreme Court doesn't take cert on it and hear that. You know, it feels to me that there's got to be a middle way somehow to do this, but it is just a slippery slope. Because at the end of the day, if a student athlete has a legitimate musical ability and is trading on that in the space like any other student could do, it's hard to say, no, you can't do that. If a student athlete has an illegitimate ability to be the spokesperson for a car dealership, not so good. So getting that right, I think, is going to be hard, but I think there'll be, you know, some movement and some accommodation, but I don't know exactly what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I would suggest, as Eric has mentioned, it probably will be resolved in the courts, and that'll be a framework for the NCAA to try and then fashion some rule and regulation. It's very hard. And there are so many, again, so many different angles to this complex issue that it's difficult. I personally believe that college sports should remain an amateur activity. And once you start down any kind of issue involving money and trying to fashion how can certain aspects of our college experience be okay, it's tough to figure that what's the safe area that you can go to.
It's complex. That's the answer to all these questions. My thought is that you have more than 400,000 student athletes under the umbrella of the association, and so I worry about treatment not just of a small number of student athletes, but how do we deal with all 400,000 plus student athletes? How does the injection of potential injection of another stream of money into the system distort what's happening in terms of recruitment, in terms of team building, in terms of decision making in the student athlete's experience? And so I find it to be deeply problematic and would side with preserving to the extent possible that collegiate student athlete model that is, again, the bedrock of the NCAA.
So Glenn, if I could just build a little bit on that, I firmly believe that the NCAA was established to enable students who are athletes at an institution to compete against students who are athletes at another institution. That's what we do. Full stop, done. So if you take that framework, which I believe in, then pay for play is off the table. That's not what we do. And if the courts say it's okay to do that, then I think you're going to see a splintering. Some conferences, I think a limited number, will say okay, great, and others are going to go to the Ivy model, and we're going to be amateur athletes playing each other. I think where the gray area comes is when you get to name, image, and likeness, because that's a little different. It's another dimension of an individual. But getting that squared away to preserve the integrity of the amateur model that I believe in is just not going to be easy.
Anything else? Yes.
How has the reality of working in or with college athletics been different from your perception of it prior to your ascension to your current roles?
And introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. Tim Duncan, Deputy Athletic Director for External Affairs at Northeastern.
I played college sports, and I'm so old that we just got rid of the leather helmets when I... So I go back a long way, and it has changed in dramatic ways in terms of the money influence and particularly at the basketball level, the amount of what I'd say is individual athletes focusing on one sport, AAUs focusing on single sport athletes, and kids getting programmed, and coaches and all the other peripheral influences that go along with that so early in these kids' lives that they don't have a chance to really develop different skills and sets. And I think many of them are successful, but many of them get very depressed when all of a sudden they get to college Division I level and they're not good enough because that's all they've been shooting for during their life. So it's become a much more complicated world, I think, over the last, for me, 40 years. So very, very difficult.
Well, I think I rose up through the faculty ranks, chief academic officer before becoming a president, and I was at D3 institutions in my career. So I had some interaction, of course, on the athletic side, but what I came to realize very quickly was, and appreciate, the extraordinary complexity of collegiate athletics across the board, from scholarship management, budgets, personnel, compliance, the whole range of issues that shape the everyday life of the athletic director. And so I spent a lot of time when I became president to make sure I understood and very well the kinds of issues. So I could work with the athletic director as needed. It's all part of the trust building process. And so the complexity of it is what I have come to appreciate. And I think unless you're in a role, your role, or perhaps our role, folks who are critical of collegiate athletics in some way or another simply don't appreciate, I think, the complexity of what you're dealing with or what we have to deal with on occasions.
So I came up through the academic ranks too. Ron had a more interesting pathway to a presidency. But the thing that strikes me, well, I'll put it this way. When people ask me what surprised me as I came to be president here, there are two things. One is the depth at which we do things at the university. I knew the breadth, but the depth is pretty stunning. And the second is the passion people have for Gopher Athletics. It is stunning how much people really care about what happens in Minnesota athletics. And so having that public interest and therefore being the steward of a resource that people care a lot about is interesting. And it's a big business. I mean, our athletic budget's now $115 million a year. We have TV revenue, ticket sales, venues, the whole thing. It's a big business. And so you need to pay attention, and you need to get people in charge of it who are really, really good.
Rob Clark, Executive Senior Associate at Long Beach State. With the complexity of all of these issues, how do you prefer to be communicated to and by your athletic director regarding these complex issues, particularly for institutional control as well?
Yeah, and I'll take that. Instantly is my preference, and at a level of granularity that the AD feels is important. You know, if one of our starting players in a marquee sport gets injured in practice, I probably need to know about that afternoon. And my AD is just spot on in terms of understanding the need to communicate and to keep my chief of staff and me in the loop.
Yeah, I would echo that with social media. If it's not instantly, it's too late.
Right. Because
it's on the social media, and the last thing you want to read about is a social media viral experience that's going out there. And so that's where trust with your AD. He has to trust you. If he tells you something, you're not going to go crazy at the moment. And so maybe later. That's why I said at the moment, you know. And so you have to really get that information quickly, and as Eric indicated, enough so that you can make some quick decisions, because you now have to make calls of, is this something you're going to bring your trustees into? Are you going to bring the whole community? Your faculty do not want to also hear about it on social media. They want to know what's happening. And so it's a much quicker communication world.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo the same thing. I don't want to be surprised. And my AD, Richard Johnson, doesn't surprise me, or doesn't let me be surprised. He might surprise me, but he doesn't let me be surprised. And communication in all forms. I mean, we meet regularly. We get together during the week, pick up the phone, text. I mean, that to me is kind of the smooth flow of communication. So no one feels inhibited from contacting when we need to be contacted.
Follow up, how does that change at a public institution versus private institution?
Well, I mentioned texting. Texting's a wonderful thing, because all of our communications are public documents. You're required by the Public Disclosure Acts to keep them if they track a decision. But routine communications you don't have to keep, and so those are a good way to manage.
I would also suggest, I'm a recovering lawyer, that you be careful what you text and what you email on issues that you may not have all the facts, because that will be discoverable. And so a phone call is preferred.
The world's best text, I should have said, call me.
Yeah, that is absolutely the case. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Brad Edwards, Director of Athletics at George Mason University. First of all, thank all of you for being here. And Nayef, I just have to say my wife is a proud Wofford grad. So
outstanding.
I appreciate your institution's efforts to get into my personal finances on a routine basis. So kudos.
We're gonna focus on that.
Yes, you are. I appreciate that very much. And my question is just a little bit different, because obviously there's turnover in the AD ranks and coaching ranks, and there's also turnover in the presidential ranks, as you know. What advice or guidance would you give to us as an AD universe when you're coming into a new job, to an incumbent athletic director, to gain your trust the quickest and the fastest in terms of that, that trust building, the communication, and the cadence of that? What could you just add some clarity to that, maybe?
Well, my AD had been around a long time, still there, and I think the key is just sitting down and getting to know the AD, not only professionally but personally. So we spent a lot of time in meetings, catching me up on issues at the college, kind of the challenges, giving me a good historical overview of the different areas of the operation. I think that's very important. But also then getting out and in an environment outside the office and being able to sit there and have a casual conversation, which is what I happen to like a good deal, right? So get to know my staff not only in a professional setting in the office, but let's go outside and have a cup of coffee or something else and lunch, and let's talk these things over. So I benefited from a good deal of his time and energy in bringing me up to speed on Wofford College athletics, and for him being a sounding board when I needed to understand something in the complex that is Division I athletics.
I've had one athletic director, who's Bill Smith, who's been terrific with me now for 12 years. Dan had been with me for 10, and before that I had somebody who'd been with me a couple of years. And what I've tried to share with them is that we have to map out not just a strategy for them and me, but them and the whole community and me. And we try and do that with our coaches, because if they're just talking to me and they're not talking to the provost, they're not talking to the admissions director, and they're not talking to the faculty directly, then our relationship could be wonderful, but after about a year and a half, all of a sudden mistakes start to occur and problems start to occur. So we try in that first year to map out who are the people they're going to go see and sit down with and get to know. And then I go talk to them and say, what do you think? How's he doing? And I get a sort of a 360, just like I ask people to give me 360 review of how's it going early. Because when you have a problem, that is no time to find out that nobody liked this guy or woman.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And, frankly, that chemistry is going to emerge during the interview process, and really pretty early on. I'm on my fourth athletic director, count the interim, and you learn. It's silly to think that you don't mature and grow during a time as president, and you learn what you need and what core competencies and personality traits you are gotta have, and some are nice to have, but gotta have. And then in the interview process, you can select for those, and usually that works out well. But again, the personal connection is important, but also being sure that person or that the team of that person is also well integrated into the fabric of the institution is really important as well, as Ron says.
Anything else?
Sure. Sorry to keep asking questions, but we're obviously the Final Four of men's basketball. How much are you involved in the hire of high-profile sports like men's basketball?
Well, I'm involved. I trust the AD and his team to identify suitable candidates for key positions. But we're always talking through the process. We recognize the importance of those high-profile positions, and he keeps me well involved in the process. And I will have a role and a veto power. I trust the AD and his team to identify those suitable candidates who understand the nature of the institution and the mission of the institution.
I meet all the finalists with IRD, and I make it clear to the finalists that the AD is going to make the decision on who to hire. I will give him my thoughts, whether they're positive or negative, but at the end of the day, he's going to make the decision, as I try to allow all of my cabinet to do, because if it doesn't work out, they've got to get rid of him, not me. And so it seems to work, but you also, I think, have to have a clear understanding with your AD is what are the financial parameters that you're going to allow so that you don't get yourself into a situation where you have one finalist and all of a sudden you're way off on the financial parameters. So in this high market environment we're in, it's early to get that out on the table, I think, with candidates and with the AD very early.
Yeah, I would agree with Ron. I mean, we certainly communicate with the coaching candidate agent sort of what reasonable salary parameters would look like. I interview all the finalists as well, but again, any effective leader is going to delegate responsibility to the people who actually have responsibility, and if you do that, you also have to delegate the authority. And so the AD, I think, would not hire a coach that I said, boy, I think that's not a good idea, but it's his call. As is renewal or non-renewal and contract extensions, those are AD responsibilities. They're in conversation with me, but they're his responsibility.
And I want to add to that, things like compensation and those types of subjects will be covered for you as ADs if you hire a good and competent executive search. Any other questions? Okay, Dr. Kaler, we talked about this. Where do you think is a situation, or what do you think is the opportunity for you to step in to make a statement? Some statements will come from the athletic director. When do you feel that you would have to jump in?
Yeah, that's actually a good question, and it speaks more broadly to how you communicate in the institution overall. And presidents need to communicate regularly, but not too frequently. You can't have the president sending out an email that says, hey, we're going to wash the windows at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, take your stuff off the ledge. No, can't do that. So it's a fine tuning. I generally restrict my statements to things that affect the institution's name, image, and likeness, if you will. And unfortunately, high-profile athletic things have the potential to do that. But it's a high-profile element. And again, when it's a feel-good kind of announcement, we hired Lindsay Whalen. You may have heard of her as our women's basketball coach. The AD gets to make that announcement. That's a good news thing, and so you help build their brand and voice. But when it's critical to the institution's reputation, the president needs to be the one messaging that.
Yeah, I agree completely. Let the AD make those announcements, but crisis situations or name, image, and likeness situations with the institution as a whole, I think it's the president's responsibility.
And sometimes, as you know, you have to have an announcement that's not a grand hiring, but letting someone go. And my AD and I have always agreed that I'll try and say something as a quote in that, so that he and she, both the person leaving and the athletic director, know that I'm supporting him, and the community knows that.
Did, in our business, with every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction to things that happen in the news. And have you covered off with your development people with the news of what happened in collegiate sports with donors giving for admissions, et cetera? Have you covered that as something with your staffs?
Yeah, we have what we call a crisis management group because we have crises on a semi-regular basis. They regularly meet weekly, but also on an ad hoc basis. So if something bad happens, we have a very well-established communication strategy to the foundation and to community relations, government relations. All the stakeholders get touched really within hours.
Not only have I tried to talk to our athletic director and our folks about the specific issues that were involved in this most recent pay for admissions recent activity. But also, Eric alluded to my past. I was a former U.S. Congressman. I think Congress is going to come out, they've already filed a bill, I understand, taxing anyone who gives to a nonprofit institution, a school, if your son or daughter is an athlete or a student there. And so we have to sort of get ahead of that curve and figure out, well, who may have given money to schools, whether it be retroactive, who knows, but it's certainly something that the bill has been filed and maybe prospective. So, somebody gives you $10,000 to support your sports soccer program. Does that mean all of a sudden their son or daughter is no longer going to be just an ordinary student and is going to be on the front page? You got to get ahead of the curve on these types of issues. I don't think that any of us are sure of how this will all play out, but it's my experience in the political world is it's usually 1, 2, and 3 of issues that fall out. So,
yeah, I mean, we've discussed it. It's not necessarily something that would bubble up at our college, but just to make people aware, and our expectations should something like that happen.
So do you think it would affect regular development, like quote unquote legal development, as fundraising for a university or an institution?
Well, if this bill passes, it'll have a definite impact if it's not tax deductible for people who are giving money to schools, which has been, I think, a practice going back to the founding of the earliest schools in our country. So yes.
Interesting. Any questions? Anything about this? Yeah.
Ziggy Siegfried, Cal State Bakersfield, Director of Athletics. You mentioned about how much fans, alumni are interested in sports. What's all of your philosophies on athletics fundraising and how it integrates with maybe the not as visible areas of campus that might be a priority of yours?
So our each one of our units has a development director. So there is an individual who is the director of development for Gopher Athletics. There's also one for Bulldog Athletics in Duluth. They play pretty good hockey up there. And he's in constant conversation with the foundation overall in terms of setting priorities and identifying donors. And in the development world, the classic competition for donors is actually a healthy thing. And we have people who are interested in Gopher Athletics who are also interested in agricultural or vet med. And so we'll often blend a proposal to them that lets them pick from a menu of things that they're interested in. And again, as is almost always the case in everything, communication is really, really important. And our development structure is such that not only do you get quote unquote credit for raising a gift for your own fund, if you help one of your colleagues raise a gift for somebody else, you get a plus up on that too. So communications and trying to impress on the fact that it's a team sport that benefits the institution, not the individual silos, and that institution is really important.
I also think trying to make sure that donors appreciate that their gift doesn't give absolute control is important, that institutions are appreciative, but we still have to have the autonomous ability to direct the programs, and the coaches have to have the ability to do what they think is in best interest of the athletes. And that's always, I think, a potential problem when you're out fundraising for sports with larger dollars. But I think that it's appropriate to raise money for facilities and for programs and for travel for sports teams, so that we do it and we have individuals who are responsible for going out there. But making sure it's clear boundaries, I think, is critical.
We have an athletic fundraising program that is well integrated. It runs parallel to, but closely coordinates with our general advancement program. And so there's a lot of kind of planning on solicitations, goals, what do we need here and there, and focusing on different segments of the donor base. But one of the things, Eric mentioned this a while back, the fan base, right? And our role as presidents and the athletic director's role in not only cultivating a fan base, but also sustaining that fan base. The athletic program is both about creating opportunities for student athletes to succeed and have an extraordinary educational experience. But there's a responsibility too, I feel, in kind of cultivating that fan base and bringing these people on board, generating enthusiasm and excitement, not at all costs, of course, but and that to me impacts, of course, the nature of fundraising on the athletic side. When people feel good about the athletic program, not only, and they always feel good when you win, right? Everyone wants to win, but win with integrity. That enhances fundraising. It on the athletic side, enhances your overall advancement program. So I think being cognizant of that fan base in the community and the alumni world is also very important.
Thank you.
Yes.
This is for Minnesota President. Two questions. One, as you see in the merit for consolidation with institutions, where you now have institutions combining, dealing with enrollment. I'm Charles Guthrie from the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, Director of Athletics, and we've just taken on 3 community colleges within the state of Wisconsin, kind of this conversion deal. You see it in Georgia where institutions combine. And I know in your situation, you have oversight of a few institutions that have athletics in the Minnesota system, and I want to know how you were dealing with that, and if any of those issues were coming to in your office from those other institutions. You mentioned Duluth. Well, the AD technically probably reports ultimately to you. And then my second question is, on your way out the door, is there anything you can leave us with on some impactful tidbits?
So the system structure is important. We do have 5 campuses. The 4 other campuses outside the Twin Cities all have chancellors who manage them, and the athletic directors at those institutions report to the chancellor. And we have a D2 school, D3 school with no athletics, D1 school in Duluth is D1 in hockey, and D2 in everything else. And so those responsibilities are allocated to the campus, and their budget buildup is part of the overall structure of those campuses. So they would make their athletic requests in concert with their academic requests during the central budget process. So that's how that works. Certainly the consolidation elements are in play in Minnesota, just as they are in Wisconsin for some of the same reasons. We have a Minnesota state system that has 6 4-year schools and all of the community colleges are 2-year schools in Minnesota. Someday there will be a reckoning and a reconsideration of how all of those resources are allocated. That is a third rail politically in Minnesota, so I'm not going to go there. But as you're seeing in Wisconsin, something like that will eventually, I think, happen just because of the demographics of high school graduates in the upper Midwest. They're just not the bodies that can fill all of those seats. In terms of outgoing advice, that's always dangerous to try to give, but I'm a big fan of college athletics, always have been. Was too slow and uncoordinated to be a very competitive athlete, but I love watching the games, and I think they are a unique part of American culture. Nowhere else in the world are athletic events so closely coordinated with higher education as they are here, and I think that's an important part of our culture, and I think we need, as a group, to keep a clear focus. I defined what I thought the NCAA was about a little while ago, and I think that's really important. And our ability as responsible leaders to maintain that model and control the bad actors who are out there, because there is a lot of money involved and a lot of egos and a lot of all of the things that drive people to do things that are not on the straight and narrow are there. So. My advice is to keep focused on a high level of competitive excellence for amateur athletes and move it forward.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, we'll flip the script now.
Quick question.
I'm sorry.
Peter Pilling from Columbia. I'd like to see if you could share some insight on new initiatives that are taking place on your campuses to deal with mental health issues.
Well, our campus is 1,700 students, and our student athletes are integrated into the daily fabric. So we don't, they eat with students in the cafeteria. They're living across all our residence facilities, and so they have access to all the support services that every other student has. We have increased our counseling services over the past several years, added more staff, participated in the JED program for counseling. One of the things about student athletes that is different from most students on campus, the non-athlete student, is that the student athlete has built in an extraordinary network of support, right? From coaches and all the athletic staff, trainers and the like. So, and they're with these folks, this network, a lot more than the non-athlete student is with the faculty member or the student life staff. So having close communication as needed, respecting, of course, privacy and the like, close communication and coordination, identifying issues early on, and then we can support those student athletes with the services on campus and as needed off campus. But it's the network for the student athlete that is, I think, very important in our case.
One of the things that we're trying to do is, because these athletes have been so focused, if they get hurt and they no longer could continue their play, that is a perfect case of real possible depression and dysfunction in the classroom, and we're trying to get counseling for them, even if they don't exhibit any problems, because we know their world is going to change. They won't have the support, the coaches, the teammates. They're no longer on the team. So we're trying to have one individual on our counseling team who will reach out to them and say, why don't you come in and talk? Or have the coaches, encourage them to talk about what's going on in their life, because it's a big deal. That's one thing. The other is that we're just staffing up. This past fall, our counseling services had 25% more individuals come in and see them than the previous year. That's a huge uptick. Kids today have a lot of issues they're trying to deal with. They came through issues in high school, and they're in many cases smart, hardworking, but they have some issues that they need to talk through. So building up that is very important.
So Ron's right, and it is remarkable the fraction of entering class at Minnesota who self-identifies as having a mental health issue or challenge already as they come in at 18 years old, typically. That's a real problem in our society, and we could talk a lot about what drives that, but I'm a chemical engineer, not a psychologist, so I would just be an amateur, but I will tell you it exists. And we as institutions cannot possibly staff up a structure that's robust enough to provide all of the mental health support that all of our students need, athletes as well as other students. We just can't do it. And we have put a lot of resources into mental health support over the past 3 or 4 years at Minnesota, and we'll continue to provide the support that's needed. But we've got to be in a situation where we can respond promptly to acute issues. We can help students learn how to manage their stress, healthy living, mindfulness, etc. But we just about can't be the routine provider of mental health services for what will be 15,000 or 20,000 students on our campus. So we need to feather in private sector healthcare to provide that kind of structure. To the issues when student athletes particularly are not able to participate in their sport anymore, that is a critical point. And I'm not sure exactly the structure that we have in place to do that, but I know we are mindful to it.
Any other questions? Okay, we're going to flip the script. We're running out of time, but we did want to talk about hiring athletic directors. So at the beginning, we talked about the optimal president-athletic director relationship. What are some things that you look for when you attempt to gauge that optimal working relationship when you're interviewing a candidate, when you're doing a search for an athletic director?
I like to take them to dinner and talk about everything but athletics. I want to know what's this person really about. I'm assuming they know a lot about athletics, but I just like to go out and talk about their family and their life and what's important to them and how they've been doing things and get a sense of who they are first. Then we'll meet them later and we start talking about, okay, what's your philosophy of winning and what's your philosophy of hiring coaches and all the other issues. I've played sports all my life, so it's not like I'm asking them something I'm not aware of. So it's, I think, but finding out who that person is the most critical factor, because when things go wrong, it's not just about how did they coach when they were coached, it's how do they deal with people.
For me, it's the right fit at the right time, and that time, of course, changes. And there will be a time at an institution that you need to bring in somebody who's externally focused, who understands marketing, who's going to drive the business side of this. There are times you're going to need to bring in somebody who really can set an ethical example and be sure that we're being our best people all the time. You'll need some other skill sets as you go. But for me, the really critical element is experience. We are a competitive program in an A5 conference, so this needs to probably not be somebody's first job as an athletic director. So that experience in history, to me, is really important.
I'd say two things. One is, do you understand who we are? We're a competitive program in a mid-major conference at a small liberal arts college. So who we are, what we're about, and that's very important to me. We're very different as a 1700s institution, enrollment institution playing D1 athletics. And then the second thing is, as Ron said, because we're small and because our senior VP relationships are close and intimate, I like to go out to dinner too. I like to go out to dinner in general, but I've gone out with every senior VP candidate that we've hired. I've done the same thing, just to get to know them, because again, I think that close working relationship is both professional and personal, and building trust and understanding that person is vital.
I would say one other thing that's very important is to have a similar time horizon where the candidate sees themselves taking the job and staying. Nothing worse than investing for 2 years and your AD would go off to a better potential job. So you really have to have a agreed upon handshake. I look that person in the eye every time and shake and say, we've agreed to this. I can't force you contractually to stay, but man to man, woman to woman, we're going to make this work. And if they walk out, which they've never done, they know that they're backing out of a personal commitment. I think that's important. Doesn't have to be for life, but at least the time that you both can agree.
That is to play off of that, Glenn, if I can for just a second. It's really important. And the corollary to that, by the way, applies to coaches. If you look at successful athletic programs, not always, but a lot of the time, that coach has been there for a long time. She's built a relationship with the community. She's viewed as a leader. She's got a history and a tradition. That matters. And the same's true for the athletic director. If you've got a great fit, and the tone and tenor and the performance in your department is what you want it to be, you want that person to stay.
What clues do you look for from the moment a candidate walks in the door, from, verbal communication, body language, et cetera? What are things that you look for specifically in a new candidate when you walk in?
I'll be a little flip at the end of our time here together. I'm really interested in how old their kids are, because to longevity, to connection with the community, et cetera, are you coming here to build a career and settle? Great. And you know, all of the social psychological clues, right? How's the handshake? Do they make eye contact? Are they sincere and honest? Do they answer questions in a concise and timely way? All of the sort of things that make a person, yeah, I could go on a train ride with this guy. Or, my God, is it over yet? Yeah.
I like to meet the key people I'm hiring at least 3 times. And the first time I like to meet them is on a Skype interview. Nothing worse than bringing somebody to campus for an all-day visit, and in 5 seconds you know that was a mistake.
That's the day you're not getting back.
Yeah, exactly. So I do Skype visits with everybody first, and then break it down. And you know, people come to campus and they may have a bad day, and you know, maybe something went wrong at home, and so you get this impression initially, and it's like, wow, they're not going to be good. But then you see them the second time, and we try not to snap to, okay, this is the person, but give everybody a second shot that we think are really serious. And that seems to help people lock into both the candidate and the institution who you need.
I don't know if I can do 3 times, to be honest with you, but I do like to see him a couple of times, including dinner. What I look for is, why do you want to be here? And I'm always wary of, well, it's a small school, great reputation, and a great program. I mean, that all sounds nice. I agree with all of it. But is there something different about why you want to be at Wofford College? That, to me, is very important. Have you thought about why you want to be here, or are you just kind of fishing around in the pond of possible opportunities? And so I want to be convinced that you really want to be at Wofford College, and how can you convince me? That's what I look for.
Any quick questions on the hiring process? The end of our time, but if you have a quick one. Anybody? Okay. Well, thanks very much to Dr. Nayef Samhat from Wofford, Dr. Ron Machtley from Bryant, Dr. Kaler from the University of Minnesota, from the Collegiate Consortium. I'm Glenn Sugiyama. Thank you for joining us on Athletic Director U.